Hi, I'm Jenny Trott, and in this video we're going to be talking all about advocacy. I'm interviewing Andrea Spence Jones, who is an advocate who manages Advocacy Orkney, and we're going to be talking all about what advocacy is, how you find an advocate, why you might want to use an advocate, and what to look for when you're looking for an advocate to make sure that you find the right person. So stay tuned. If you're a carer, there's lots of information here for you, and I think you'll find it really helpful. Hi Andrea, thank you for joining me here. I know you've come down from Orkney for a few days, so it was really good to be able to tie up with you. Film about advocacy, and I think probably the best thing to do to start off with is explain what advocacy is, because I know a lot of people may have heard the expression or the term but don't really understand it.
So advocacy is about speaking up for someone. So that's literally taking someone's voice and amplifying their voice to make sure that other people hear what this person has to say. So that would typically be if somebody feels that they have been asking for things or saying that they need things, but the powers that be or whoever it is they're speaking to either hasn't listened or genuinely hasn't heard them. So an advocate's role there is to actually find out what that person's asking for, get a good representation of that voice, and then take that voice and make sure that the person's wishes are included in any decisions that are made about them.
Okay. Here in Scotland, the word advocate is also used in a legal sense. So how is advocacy different to having a legal kind of standing?
Yeah, it's confusing. It can be confusing as a term, but what we don't do is give legal advice. So that's the difference between an independent advocate and a lawyer. Our job is purely to find out what someone wants and help them to say what it is that they want. So we're not there to say something has happened to someone that's illegal and shouldn't have happened. That is a lawyer's job. But the word advocacy is from the Latin. It's advoce, towards a voice. So that's the reason that we've kept that title, because it's a very literal representation of what we do.
And something I think that's quite important to mention as well is that an advocate in this sense should be independent. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, everybody in life has an advocacy role. You know, people do this all the time. Doctors advocate for patients, teachers advocate for pupils, family members advocate for each other. But what we're doing is something completely separate, because we don't have an agenda when we speak to somebody. So with the best will in the world, families don't always make the decision that you might want them to make for you. So the reason that we're independent is that we are not affiliated to any other agency or service. So there is no pressure on us. So for instance, a really good example of that would be a social worker advocating for a client, but they will have a frame of reference that they need to operate within. So they might be more risk averse, they might not want that person to make the decision that they would make, whereas an advocate would literally be listening for, well, why do you want that? You know, that could be possible, we can find out more about that. So we don't have a framework that says, well, we don't really want this person to go down this route, and that's what makes us independent. And also in terms of conflict of interest, an independent advocacy agency can't offer any other service but advocacy. So for example, if we were offering supported accommodation or something, and there was a problem with that service, then someone coming to us we would be conflicted because we couldn't advocate for the issues that person had, because we're already providing the other service. So truly independent advocacy, the service only provides advocacy and nothing else. And to be independent, then we would be members of the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance. And we would also adhere to their principles and standards, and the advocates would work to their code of practice.
Okay, so a couple of things that have come up for me there. One is, if you're looking for an advocate, if you think that that's something that you would help you, how do you know that somebody that you're looking to engage with is a good is there a good advocate? I mean, you've just mentioned being a member of that organisation, which is obviously a good pointer. Should you be looking for somebody that's working for an organisation? And how do you tell?
Well, I mean, if you were to go through any search engine and look for independent advocates in your area, you can go through the SIA. They have a map of all the agencies that are available across Scotland. So what you're looking for is a service that doesn't do anything else. So that's the first thing, they're just providing advocacy. How do you know if they're good? Well, you're looking for experienced people now. I mean, all of the advocacy services should be, if they're truly independent, the principles and standards that they've signed up to tell you, for instance, that they put the person first, that they're free of conflict of interest. So the credentials of the service should really speak for itself. But how you'll know that they're good is how you feel when you work with that person, how you build rapport with them, if they truly represent your voice, they're not trying to influence you, and you feel better as a result of their support. You'll feel it. It's very much a human. Advocacy isn't an exact science. So it's quite beautiful because it takes its steer from the person that you advocate for. So I think that's the best way of knowing. I think it's a heart and a head test for the person.
You're speaking about having a voice there. How do you work with somebody who maybe hasn't got a physical voice, who maybe finds communicates in a slightly different way? How can you know that you're representing them? Yeah,
that's a really interesting question. It's something that comes up a lot. There are different types of advocacy. So if someone tells you what they want and there's no impediments in being able to tell you, we call that instructed advocacy. So it's literally from the mouth of that person. If that's not possible, or there's any restrictions or limitations on how someone might convey their wishes with us, then we have to take a best fit approach. But that's the only time that we would do that, and that would be something called non-instructed advocacy. And what we're doing there is trying to find out more about this person. So that would involve speaking to family members, because we're interested in past, what they said in the past and what they're saying now. It's very important if we're dealing with somebody that's had an event where they've lost their speech, like after stroke or something like that, after surgery. So we need to get a sense of who this person is. So the way to do that is who's around these people. Do they have a social worker? Is there anyone that they connect with? What's the relationship with their GP? And then we would be asking. So a typical example of that might be someone who has been admitted to hospital. Could be someone elderly that's in hospital, and they are now no longer able to say what they want. But what we know from speaking to everyone else is that their wish was always that they would be returned home. So it's still important to find that out, and then we're making the best guesstimate we possibly can. But the advocate's role is also to safeguard that person's rights. So where decisions might be made about where is the best place for that person, we're not looking at what's the most convenient place for someone to be placed in terms of a local authority decision, or even a family decision. We're thinking about, well, what else could be put in place so that this person could go home. So we have to guess, but also there's a way of reading people, and most communication isn't verbal.
Absolutely. You've mentioned a few scenarios already, but I suppose it's probably a good idea to try and drill down on what somebody might want an advocate for. And these films are for people who have a caring role in their life, whether that be for someone who's young or old. We've spoken about housing, I think we've touched on education, health, basically any kind of scenario where somebody's power is potentially being taken away. Is that a fair?
Absolutely, and it's about that they may be on the receiving end of a decision that they didn't make and that they weren't included in. And an independent advocate's role is very much about, well, what aspects of the person that you made the decisions about have you already taken into account, and if you haven't, why not? So things like people that need a care package established. That's a really good example of where an advocate can be really helpful, because that person can be influenced, possibly even unduly, by everyone else that's working with that person, including family. As I said before, family, we often want different things. I love my family, but I'm not sure I would let them make a decision for me about where was the best place for me to live. I don't know if we would choose the same thing. So I think that's actually about then, you really need to drill down and understand what that person's needs are. And if you're looking at a care package, often people will say people can be very compliant when they feel vulnerable. So an advocate's job is to find out, are they just agreeing to something that they don't really want but that everyone else thinks is better? So we would be asking the questions about making an informed decision. It's very much what we're doing too. What are the pros and cons of this decision if you make it? Encouraging people to take time to think about things, to not be rushed into decisions. And interestingly, I would also say that carers, now there's a new Carers Act, and they have the right to a carers plan, and we know that that's something that's kind of slow to get off the ground. So carers themselves may need an advocate to speak up for them and their rights.
That's really interesting. Is there any circumstances where an individual would have a legal right to an advocate?
Yes, there is. In Scots law, there is the Mental Health and Treatment Act, which is from 2003, and that states categorically that you have a right to an independent advocate if you have a mental health condition. But really interestingly and rather wonderfully, I think, for Scotland, You can evoke the spirit of the Act, and the Act does not ask you to define what that mental illness is. So we don't say to people, please bring in your diagnosis and then we'll decide whether or not we can help you. So, you know, and people, mental illness can be transient, it can be situational, it can be in response to bereavement. So really the Act does say that you are entitled to have an advocate. More recently, the new Social Security Bill in Scotland also says if you have a disability, you will have a statutory right to independent advocacy. Children's Hearing Act is being revised, that's also about children being supported. So it's really important, I think, that people understand that in some instances they actually have a statutory right, not just a desire.
Yes. Of course, something that everyone is going to want to know the answer to is there a cost attached to this? And if there is, how do you know whether you're being ripped off or not?
No, there shouldn't be a cost. I can't speak for every agency in Scotland, but in terms of the ethics of independent advocacy, the whole point is that it's free to everybody, that it's confidential, that it's non-judgmental, that it's free. And that's a fabulous thing, because were there to be a charge levied, you could argue that that would affect how people are prioritised, and independent advocates want to stay well away from that. We're there to redress a power imbalance that exists naturally in society. We wouldn't want to create another one by charging people. So it's not about cost or what people can afford, it's about what they're entitled to, it's about what their rights are as an individual. So no charge, and that should be clear when you approach an advocacy agency. It should be made very clear to you at any intake or initial referral that there won't be a cost at any point throughout your support.
That's really important. So part of defining, I suppose, what the role of an advocate is and does do would also be being quite clear about what an advocate wouldn't or shouldn't or doesn't do. So maybe we could touch on that.
Yes, I mean, I think because, as I said, you know, earlier, advocacy isn't an exact science, but it does have very clear boundaries about what we can and can't do. So, for instance, an independent advocate can't collude with anything illegal. If someone came to us and said, I want help to go back to driving, even though I'm not allowed to drive anymore, we couldn't advocate for that position. We also can't give advice, so that's something that people maybe don't appreciate, because they might come to us and say, what shall I do? We're very often asked as well, when trust and rapport is established, people often ask, what would you do? And it's very important that an independent advocate doesn't say what they would do, because they're not that person, they're not living that life, and what's right for one person isn't necessarily right for another. And if people are feeling vulnerable or impressionable, there's a huge responsibility in not saying, well, here's what I think that you should do, or here's what I would do. So it's very much about exploring options with someone and helping them come to that decision themselves. So we would never say, well, we think you should go to this home, we think you should stay there, we think you should not work for this employer, anything like that. So advice giving is what agencies like Citizens Advice would do. That's not what we do at all. We can give information and we can give steer. It's not unusual for us to say other people in this situation have found this helpful, but it's still not advice, it's just pointing people in a direction. So we do a lot of onward referral as well to other agencies. So if things come up and it's clearly that a family might need mediation or support or counselling, that's very different from what an independent advocate does. So what we would do there is make an onward referral, and that's where people get advice. So really for us, it's just about what does the person need.
Sounds like an amazing job. I bet you love it.
I absolutely adore it. It's the best job in the world. It's an absolute privilege to advocate for people. Yes. It's a big responsibility because people's lives are so important, but it's a wonderful thing, and I have never seen advocacy do any harm. I think it's probably quite important to say that an independent advocate isn't there necessarily to get you the outcome that you want. Their role is to make sure that you're included in those decisions and that you're heard. But as a result of that, when communication is open and people are being listened to, they're therefore being validated, they're being valued, they're being understood, appreciated as the person that they are. And that often leads to the right result, because people start to think differently, and people who have made decisions start to think about the person and not what their policy or procedure says. And that's where it's most effective.
Hugely important. Well, thank you for the work that you do, Andrea, and thank you for coming and explaining everything about advocacy. I think that's been hugely interesting to everybody. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Well, I hope you found that interesting and useful. If you have a caring role as part of your life, then I would suggest you have a look at the rest of my channel. There's lots of videos there that I think you'll find equally helpful. And if you want to know when I release a new video, which is weekly, and you want to know what they're about, the best thing to do is to hit the subscribe button there, and then you'll automatically get a message every time I release a video.